Chapter 24. Robert scrambled to his feet and glanced about. He was standing on the narrow catwalk that ran along the inside of the balloon. He fumbled to unbutton the wet harness, then his sopping jacket, freeing Malkin, who dropped to the floor on his full black paws and pressed his nose to the metal grill of the gangway, smelling for lily scent. As Robert's eyes became accustomed to the dim light, he saw more detail. Metal girders stretched across the Zeppelin's insides to keep the silk skin in place. Their ribbed struts crisscrossed each other, creating a giant geometric frame, like an enormous rigid spider web that tapered at each end. In the huge central space, bags of gas floated above oil and fuel tanks, and bulging leather water bags hung by straps from various girders. Robert and Malkin set off along the catwalk. A little way away on the starboard side, with an outcropping platform, where a spiral stairwell descended to a hatch in the floor. Beneath it, Robert guessed, was the gondola and passengers' compartments. Malkin reached the platform first and darted down the stairwell. Robert limped behind him, struggling to keep pace, drips of water scattering in his wake. As he reached for the metal stair rail, he heard the fox let out a strangled yelp from below. "Malkin!" Robert called. He waited, but there was only silence. Then heavy footsteps, 2 sets of boots, and a of a cane, and Roach and Mould climbed into view. Malkin struggled and squirmed in Mould's arm, but Mould's fat fingers were clamped around his jaw to keep him from snapping, and his big arm was looped around Malkin's middle. He stepped forward, making himself as wide as possible and blocked the gangway so Robert couldn't pass. Roach's mirrored eyes gleamed blankly in the sockets. "We heard you clambering about, boy. Back for more, are we? Here to save your friends. Anyone would think you were the one with the metal heart." He shuffled in front of Mould and slowly unscrewed the skull tip of his walking stick, withdrawing a rapier sword from the sheath of the lacquered cane. Robert scrambled away. Pulling his penknife from his pocket, he unfolded the longest blade, and gripping the shaft with its sweaty, damp hand, swung it firmly at Roach and Mould. "Oh, lads, is that all you've got?" Roach swished his rapier sword through the air, his mirrored eyes following its path as its tip whooshed past the end of Robert's nose. Robert stumbled back along the gangway, his eyes darting round from some means of escape. He groped behind for a weapon, anything he could use against them, and then he felt the cables. They ran through rows of eyelets on the surface of the Zep's ribs. He glanced down the length of the craft and saw them disappearing into the tapering dark of the tail. Of course, steering cables. Anna had told me about them the first day on Ladybird, how they connected the steering column to the rear rudder. Her words came flooding back to him. One of them breaks and the entire airship goes off course. That was it. He grabbed the leather strap emerging from a hanging water bag for balance and slashed hard with a penknife at the central steering cable. The blade bounced wildly away, and it was all he could do to keep hold of it. When he looked at the cable, he saw his attempt hadn't even made a dink. He tried again, slashing harder, but the corded fibres were wound strongly together. "Stop your blasted flailing, clockmaker's apprentice." Mr. Roach jabbed at his chest with a rapier. Robert flinched and jerked away. The sword grazed the metal frame behind him, barely missing his chest and the silk skin of the airship. That was it. Roach would cut the cables for him. He tightened his grip on the leather strap, letting his legs loosen around under him so his arms took his full weight. "Time to die." Roach swished his rapier through the air. Robert stared into his silver eyes and saw his own ragged, desperate reflection. "Come on," he said. "Give it your best shot." Roach gave his sharp, toothed leer and thrust his sword at Robert's head. Robert ducked sideways, swinging on his strap. The sword glanced past. Missing his ear by inches, it chopped into the cables and bedded itself into the metal strut. A terrible groan jutted along the damaged cables as the thread inside them loosened and tore. Mr. Roach cursed and tried to yank his blade free, but it was stuck. Robert flattened himself against the wall as the floor of the gangway began to tremble. Mould started grasping Malkin. Still grasping Malkin, looked about warily. "What the snap?" The cable broke, slashing Roach's cheek and slicing across Mould's mirrored gaze before flailing away down the length of the balloon. Mole gave a cry and dropped Malkin. Roach was still pulling at the handle of his sword, clutching at his bloody face, when an ear-splitting groan. The ship bucked them into the air. Robert grabbed hold of Malkin's scruff as he tumbled past him and yanked him against his chest. The side of the balloon ripped open as the flailing cable cut through the tail silks like a knife and writhed out of the rear of the airship. Twisting in the wind like a snake, it wrapped itself around the rudder, jamming it into the starboard turn. Robert heard the clang of a bell and saw a vague silhouette through the silk of the prow. It was an approaching tower with moon-round clock faces embedded in each side. He gripped tight to his strap and hugged Malcolm close. "Lock your jaw onto something," he told him. "I think we're going to crash." The point of the knife touched the mess of scars on Lily's chest. Her eyes filled with tears and she gritted her teeth. Suddenly there was a massive bucking, jolt and a mad screech. That sounded like 1,000 metal forks being scraped down a blackboard. It came not from the knife or her chest, but from the Zeppelin balloon above. Professor Silverfish pulled back and glanced over his shoulder. Lily let out a breath that she hadn't even realised she'd been holding in. Outside the porthole, a bright numbered clock face filled with Roman numerals loomed large. They were about to hit Big Ben. Bearmoth's nose reared abruptly upwards and the clock face swept from view. With a massive bang, the airship careered into the roof of the tower. The porthole fractured, exploding inwards, and glass and grey roof tiles rained through the holes, shattering against the walls and floor. Lily grabbed her bed rail and clung on tight as the room shook. The whole world tipped sideways. Lamps, bowls, and tools toppled from their tables and smashed on the floor. Professor Silverfish let go of the knife and grasped at the window rail as dust and debris bounced off the heavy ticking machine on his chest. With an almighty crunch, the ship came to a final juddering stop, her nose buried deep into the steep roof of the clock tower. The impact seemed to have loosened the straps around Lily. She sat up and almost toppled from the table, but managed to steady herself and looked around for Papa. He was kicking back and forth on his rope, still tied by his wrist to a pipe on the other side of the room. He swayed in midair, his outstretched arms dangling from what was now the ceiling. Lily thought she might be able to help him down if she could get closer. She pulled her straps away, the rough edges of the leather burning her skin as she struggled free. Then she slid off the table onto a flat piece of wall, stood and pitched herself across the sloping floor. Slowly and painfully she reached up to loosen the bonds roped around Papa's ankles. Everything felt hazy. Was she still wheezy from the gunshot or the professor's anaesthetic? She coughed and spluttered from the smoke, then realised the room was on fire. Suddenly something hit her in the back, throwing her off balance. It was Professor Silverfish barrelling into her. He seized her by the waist and pulled her towards a broken glass porthole. She barely had time to struggle before he shoved her through, and they landed with a thump on the sloping roof of Big Ben. With an ear-splitting pop, the spear-sharp steeple of Big Ben's punctured the front of the balloon, and the air rushed in with a whoosh. In the pause that followed, it seemed to Robert that the Zeppelin was taking a breath. Then the point pushed further through the bent metal spiderweb of girders and pierced the first gas envelope. Kaboom! An almighty explosion battered down the length of the gangway, throwing up burning oil and fuel from the tanks as the ship tipped onto its side. Robert hung on the shaking strap and tucked his head and body around Malkin, pulling his sopping wet jacket round both of them to shield them from the fire. Mould was already alight, his eyes melting in their sockets like mercury tears. He threw his arm out and grabbed Roach's coattails. Roach fumbled, trying to push him away, and his thin fingers lost their grip on the handle of the embedded sword. The half-burned creatures toppled backwards, tumbling down the gangway and skidding towards the gash in the smouldering silk of the upturned airship. "Grab something, Roach," Mole pleaded, hugging his companion. "Let go, you fool," Roach screamed. "You're too heavy, you'll drag us both down." He thrashed his arms about, grasping blindly for a safety rail or a steel rib. But the metal was too hot. He couldn't hold on, and the flaming pair tumbled through the opening and was sucked away In a rain of glass and dust, their screams echo through the smoke from the abyss beyond. Robert clung tight to Malkin in the strap. Pain crackled in his chest and fear poured off him in sweaty globules. His wet clothes were already dry from the intense heat. Fragments of burning metal trickled past. He shielded his eyes and looked around. The blackened ribs of the airship were folding in on themselves, collapsing. Oven hot air radiated off them, licking at his bare face with flaming tongues. This wasn't the end. It wasn't over. He wouldn't let them finish his way like they did his Dar. Something dripped onto his nose. He looked up. Above him hung the big bag of ballast water. Of course, he reached out for his knife and slit its side, and the water poured down over him and Malkin, soaking them once more and tumbling along the gangway, quenching the flames in their path. Grasping the box against his chest, Robert swung back and forth, transferring his grip to a slippery new length of pipe. Following the path of doused flames, they were able to reach the spiral staircase. It was tipped at an angle, but Robert managed to climb down the steps. At the bottom, he threw open the hatch and tumbled into the gondola. Together, they slid down the sloped floor of the corridor, skating past burning hatches and windows, and bumped to a stop at the entrance of the central atrium. A pair of feet were kicking to and fro above them. "Robert, Malcolm!" a voice cried, and when Robert looked up, there was John Hartman dangling from his wrists on a rope tied to the ceiling. Robert dropped Malkin. He darted over to John and nipped playfully at his heels. There was a metal gurney bolted to the floor, and Robert climbed onto it. Standing on tiptoes, he reached up with his knife and cut John free. John slid down the wall towards a broken porthole. "Quick!" he bellowed at both. "Professor Silverfish has taken Lily into the tower. We must follow."